right now. Today is the day that you choose to change the rest of your life. It is time to turn your setback into the greatest comeback story ever told, and nobody is more capable than you. Friday! This is the Ranting Weight Watcher podcast, the future #1 weight loss podcast in the world. I am your host, Donato Russo. I hope you enjoy the show today. If this is your first time here and you enjoy the show, please subscribe and spread the word of the Ranting Weight Watcher podcast wherever you are and to whomever will listen. If you'd like to connect on social media or wherever else, check out my Linktree page, Linktree/the Ranting Weight Watcher. Let's connect today. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 196 of the Ranting Weight Watcher podcast. If this is your first time here, I want to welcome you to the show. If you enjoy it, please consider subscribing. If the app that you're using to listen to the show allows you to write a review or rate the show, please consider writing a review and leaving a 4-star or 5-star rating. Doing this will promote the podcast growth by updating an algorithm, which in turn will make it easier for anyone else looking for a weight loss or related podcast that is using the same app as you. One of the best things you could do to support this podcast is to literally tell anyone you know that is in the same position we are all in, trying to live a healthy life. Tell them about the show. Show them how to find it. And I am pleased to announce that we have another new subscriber, Sandra. Thank you. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for thinking that the Ranting Weight Watcher podcast is a worthy investment of your money. And thank you so much to all of my continued subscribers. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It is amazing the amount of outpouring of support I'm receiving from listeners. It is just a wonderful, wonderful thing. Thank you so much for all of you who give financially to this podcast. If you are interested in becoming a financial supporter of this podcast, there is a Linktree link in the description of every podcast episode. When you click it, you will be taken to a website where you will see a button that says Become a Financial Supporter. Click that button and you will be given the options available so that you can choose from there. Well, let's not waste any more time. Let's get into this! Journey updates. I am up again this week, 0.6. Total loss since January 2019 is 179.6. Pounds remaining to get to 200 is 20.4 pounds. So you guys know how I do things. That's 2 gains in a row. We wait for 3 before we make any changes. So on to the next week. Not going to really think much of this, except we're going to ride it out. I kind of touched a little bit on this last week about our focus being on the wrong things. And I kind of want to elaborate a little more on that. And then I want to get into something else I have in mind. So it's a common theme in the lifetime of this podcast. I say things repetitively pretty often. A lot of that is because you don't really absorb it every time I say it. It takes time. It takes many seeds to be planted for someone to finally grasp it. Some of the common themes throughout the entirety of this podcast, especially the more recent stuff, is how our focus is on the wrong things and how the entire systems we deal with causes us to focus on the wrong things. I don't know that there is a single weight loss plan out there that concentrates primarily on behavior without having some sort of weigh-in. I'm not really sure. But the way things happen in most cases is you have a weigh-in day. What happens so often, it's not just with me, I see many people go through this. It's that you start to actually believe that whatever you do in the past 7 days needs to show up on weigh-in day. It's a common thought process, and that's only because of the way it's structured. You weigh in on the first day of every week. Your whole week resets. Everything starts new. You have a workshop that kind of resets your thinking for the week. All of it happens once a week. You step on the scale once a week, and it's official. You're stamped. And even the questioning involved during these times, what'd you do differently this week? When these questions are asked, it is also gearing you to believe that what you did in the last 7 days is what caused the immediate result. So at the point in time when the results don't come, it becomes like, what did I do wrong? And it's just not the case. Just because a result doesn't show up in 7 days doesn't mean you did something wrong. If the scale goes in the wrong direction in 7 days, doesn't mean you did something wrong. Our focus is on the result. I don't know if there is a single weight loss program out there that doesn't do that, that doesn't get you in some way, shape, or form focused on the result as a part of your success. I went through all of this, so I can tell you from firsthand knowledge what it's like. I'm not guessing my way through anything I'm saying here. By the way things are structured, it gears you to believe that because you do something wrong, it shows up on weigh-in day, and because you do something right, it shows up on weigh-in day. And one thing I've said many times is, on the weeks where you know you blew it, and then you go to step on the scale on weigh-in day, and the scale goes in your favor, and there's just no reason to believe that you should have lost weight that week, nobody in their right mind would replicate that week. If you binge ate every day of the week and went way over on points or way over on macros or way over on calories, if you did all of that all 7 days of the week and you stepped on the scale on weigh-in day and you still lost, nobody in their right mind would replicate that and expect it to go that way again. So this theology in mind proves my case that what shows up on weigh-in day isn't necessarily the result of the work you've done in the last 7 days. It could be a result of the work you've done in the last 21 days. It could be anything. There's no real hard evidence here to believe that, except for the fact that I could say to you that nobody would ever replicate a poor week on purpose to prove it to me. That's the one thing I know. The systems we choose get us oriented to think based on the result. The result is everything. It's everything. And no matter how many times people say, oh, the scale doesn't define me, it surely does. Because the fact that you're saying the scale doesn't define you is mere evidence that it bugs you. Let that sink in for a minute. Because if it truly didn't bother you, you don't owe anybody explanations. There's not a single person that should be questioning, why is this happening to you? Especially not based on a result. Now, if we see that the results are the same and you have a trend, then someone can question you. If we have 3-4 weeks in a row of upward climbing and you know that your goal is to lose weight, then there can be a question. Why? Because there's a trend in the wrong direction. 1 week is not a trend. 3 weeks, you could start saying there's a trend. You go up 3 weeks in a row, hey, let's get focused. What is not being done? What is being done? What needs to change? What do you need to tweak? What is going on that needs correcting or adjusting? Adjusting is part of the journey. Another common thing I always say, that we try to live a healthy life without changing anything. We insist that we can figure out a way to live how we've always lived, make zero changes, but somehow lose weight. I've seen time and time again people do this, and including myself. I took my old life into my new life and insisted that certain foods be in my life and I couldn't live without them. And the journey got hindered eventually because of that. There are so many ways that we can focus on the wrong things. I explained last week how focus on a different type of exercise can set up for success or failure in the long run, because we are so stuck on a result. We think that the way that would get us the longest lasting results isn't good enough because the results don't come quick enough. I mean, however little patience people have for losing the amount of weight that they need to lose or want to lose, it's even heightened when you don't see the scale going anywhere. There's no exception for actual fluctuation. No matter how many times I say, regardless of how consistent you are, the one thing that is sure is that the scale will still fluctuate. And the funny thing is, if I snapped my fingers and made all of you guys who are listening to me the number that you have in mind that is your goal, if I snapped my fingers and made you the exact number you believe is the number you want to be, you would think that that would guarantee that you're healthy. But there's something much bigger that we don't concentrate on. We are not pointed to. We are not even encouraged to pay attention to it by anyone. Essentially, the sole people out there that would encourage you to look at your weight in this fashion would be personal trainers that you hire, or people very, very much into fitness on a level that has nothing to do with programs like WW or whichever program of your choice. Because to them, fitness is different. They're looking at fitness on a very different level. They look on it based on body composition. And I've said this before. This is a common theme on this episode. This is a common theme on this podcast. You could have 4 people, all the same weight, and you might perceive that number to be a healthy number. But if 3 out of the 4 are 40% body fat, and the 4th one is 10% body fat, what does the scale number mean? The other 3 people are carrying 3 times more fat than the one. Essentially, they're carrying 300% more fat each than the one person, but they're all the same scale number. That's the important thing I need you to realize here. We're so hyper-focused on a number that appears on a screen when you step on a box. And that number is only one representative of what your body is made of. And we're so hyper-focused on that we lose sight of everything else. We're not really trying to lose weight here. We're trying to lose fat. Let's just get that clear. And the crazy thing now, in the world we live in right now, there's not just one way to manufacture a scale result. There's multiple ways now. I can go under a knife, have surgery, and manufacture a scale result. Does that guarantee that I'm healthy? No. I could take medication and I could drop weight. And the scale number will go down. Does that mean I'm healthy at the end of it? I could starve myself. I can manufacture a scale number. Does that mean I'm healthy at the end of it? I can adopt extremely bad habits that create weight loss as a byproduct. I gave you the example just a couple weeks ago of a friend of mine who, in high school, decided every time he was hungry, he was going to smoke a cigarette. And that friend died way too young. So if I can manufacture scale results like this, and I could show you so many ways that that scale number would end up not really dictating whether or not you're healthy, what's the scale number really worth? It's not. It's not worth anything. Another theme that is commonly said throughout the years of this podcast is everything will work for a time. Everything will work for a time. Health plans that you become a part of, they will work for a time. But people, they never get to the point where they realize that they are on a transitional moment. And I brought this up in last week's podcast as well. So many people don't recognize that they are at a point of transition. And that's because of the barriers we set. All of us have barriers. So many of us believe that the things that worked on day one should also work on day 551. In other words, if I took it in school, in the school sense, whatever you learned in kindergarten should also get you your Harvard diploma. That's why I call health plans that you become a member of a beginning. Because essentially you're being taught a rudimentary way to manufacture a lower scale result. You're not being taught why you were here, what choices or bad habits you adopted in your life to create this problem. As a matter of fact, so many of them don't even point the finger at you. It's probably, I'm one of the few that would point the finger and say, it starts with you. And I say this, again, out of personal experience. I'm not saying it because I'm better than you. I'm saying that I could take a good look, hard look at the last 5.5 years of my life, and I can compare it to all of the years before that. And I could see the work ethic in both time periods. I know what I did to get to where I am right now. I know what I didn't do and created essentially the same result. Because surgery got me to lose 183 pounds. I've been busting my ass for 5.5 years. And now with these last 2 gains, I'm not even at the 183 pound mark, which I was just a few weeks ago. It's different. The focus is different. Some of the barriers that I see, including me, is that the overwhelming majority of the people want to be healthy. It's a true desire. But they love to believe very enabling messages like you can eat what you want and still lose weight. And like I said before, everything works for a time. People become so obsessed with the food that they're eating. I can't live without this. If I go without this, then I'll just binge eat it because I'll feel deprived. If you consistently ate a food day after day, week after week, versus having one day of outright binge eating it. If I compared the two, what you consistently eat over a month time versus the one binge, or I don't even know how many binges you would have. If you gave up a food, how often would you binge eat? That's really the question. And if I ate it 30 days versus 2 days, if I ate it 30 days versus 3 or 4 days, I'm pretty sure that the 30 days of consistently eating that thing is going to outweigh the 4 times you would have binge eaten it because you feel deprived. Even that word deprived, it's a common theme on this podcast. It is the most overly used, stretched vocabulary in the weight loss world. There's not a single person listening to me that actually is deprived. People that are homeless with their hands out praying to God that somebody hands them a coin because their stomach is rumbling and it's been rumbling for the last 10 hours, they are deprived. People in third world countries who will do anything to fill their stomachs, they are deprived. You skipping out on something that isn't good for you anyway, you're not deprived. It was a word that was overstretched to enable you to remain a customer for a longer period of time. That's the truth of it. You take it for what you will. If you were paying me $50 a month and I enabled you to do it, you should raise an eyebrow. Because it's against my best interest for you to succeed and move on. And yet I sit here and I tell you that these weight loss programs that we can access and become members of are the beginning. They aren't the end. Every single one of them. Because the end is learning proper nourishment. It's learning how to eat to benefit your body versus what you feel like. It's eating what your body needs versus what will pleasure your tongue. That's the end game. All of the emotions we put toward food, how it's a reward system, it's a celebratory thing, it's a part of life. That's another barrier. Part of what got us in this position in the first place is that food is just too much a part of our lives for whatever reason. Everything is always centered around food. If you think about the time when you're kids, I had a great group of friends growing up. And it all started meeting one of my friends. I moved to a new neighborhood. I was approximately 10 years old. It was like 86, 87, something like that. We moved to this new neighborhood. And I see a young guy across the street. And he's throwing rocks at the telephone pole. And he's probably hitting it every time. So I walk up to that guy and I say, "Why are you throwing rocks at the telephone pole? What did it do to you?" And this sparked a friendship that still exists to this day. That moment. That man is, by all means, a brother to me. And it just started there. This gave birth to meeting other kids in the neighborhood. And we all hung out under this tree in my front yard on a regular basis. There was this Chinese maple. I think it was a Chinese maple tree. And this tree was like my mother's favorite tree on the property. And she used to hate when we hung on it and kind of leaned on it and all these things. Like, get away from my tree. But we would all hang out there. We didn't have money. We didn't have the kind of, we had freedom to ride our bikes around the neighborhood, but we didn't have freedom to do anything except ride our bikes. Food wasn't part of it because nobody had money. We were too young to think about that. So we went out, we played, we hung out, we laughed, we joked, we made fun of each other. And we created lasting bonds that exist today. And if we went months without speaking and then just happened to speak, it'd be like we picked up right where we left off, under that Chinese maple tree. None of that interaction was centered around food. None of it. Somehow, somewhere, life gets centered around food. You get older, you get jobs, and you try to make plans with those same people. I'm like, oh, let's go out to eat. Let's go out to the movies. Let's go out, whatever it is. Everything is, let's go do something. That costs money, and you can bet in Vegas that food is involved at some point. We went through our entire childhoods having food not involved because we didn't have money. than to have our teenage years and, young adult years become more and more and more food-centered. Why am I telling you all this? It's all connected in a way. I'm telling you that one of the common themes of this podcast is that this journey is a journey of sacrifice. And at some point, to progress forward, sacrifices need to be made. Now, people hear that word sacrifice and they don't like that I use it. And I use it on purpose because it's the truth. This is not about creating a scale result. This is about creating the best version of you, the best version of me. And becoming the best version of ourselves takes sacrifice. Manufacturing a scale result, you can get away with it and not sacrifice a thing. But becoming the best version of you, becoming what I said in the previous episode, 98, 99 years old, chasing around great grandkids and having the rest of the living world looking at you dumbfounded, trying to figure out how you're living a life like this. That's possible. That's the real goal. That's becoming the best version of you. What good is living in old age? What good is it if it's not to live like that? Just think about that for a second. What good is creating all this and doing all this work if it's not for that? I mean, do you guys really sit here and tell me that you're counting points, you're counting macros, you're counting calories, you're doing all of this stuff, and you're in full expectation that at some point in your life, people are going to have to help you out of a chair, you're going to live in a nursing home, you're not going to have, because it's part of old age? What's the quality of life? What is it? You're doing all this work and that's what you expect? You expect to, at some point in your life, to be in an assisted care living facility? To not be able to pick yourself out of bed without a nurse helping you? Or using a walker to get to the main area where all the other people are? So that somebody can entertain you for a while? That's what you still expect doing all this? Not me. That's not what I expect. People, they get to their 40s and they talk about it's midlife. Midlife. You take that somewhere else. I'm a third of my way through my life. How about that? I'm not doing this work to live to 80. I'm doing this work at least to make it to 100. At minimum. And not only live to 100, but to have the brains, to have the ability to move and continue on a quality of life. Because right now, the life expectancy of a U.S. citizen is 76 years old. You're going to retire at 65, and you got 11 years to live it up, baby. What are you going to do for the next 11 years? Because that's all you got left. What good is it? What good is all of this? If that's what you're expecting. If that's what you see. And I really, really want you, I would love for you to think about that. What do you envision the end of your life to be? And if it's anything less than chasing your great-grandchildren around in your 90s, I would severely question why you're doing this. If you don't think it's possible to have that, if that's so far-fetched, me saying that, I think that's pretty sad. But I'm talking about all of this because part of the journey is the end. And part of the end is having a new life with something in your life that has nothing to do with food. So I'm going to close with this question. If I could snap my fingers right now and remove all barriers, I'm talking about physical barriers, whatever you think your body can and can't do, if I can remove that. Financial barriers, I can remove that. Money's no object. And if I could remove almost any possibility of failure, and I'm not just talking about fitness here. I'm not just talking about health goals. I'm talking about if I removed your health problems, if I removed your financial problems, and if I removed the possibility of you failing, what would you do? What would you do? That's the question. With no physical limitation, with no financial limitation, and with no possibility of failure, what would you do? Because something has to replace the relationship with food. And so many people never get there. And you kind of just go around in circles your entire life. You go up a little, you go down a little, you go up a little, you go down a little, and you're just centered in this world of, I live around food. Food is a part of my life. So, if I can remove all that, when you look at your body and you think, oh, I got bad knees, if I can remove all of that, oh, I don't really have any money to do anything. If I can remove all that, oh, I've always wanted to try this, but I don't think I can do it. If I can remove the possibility of failure, what would you do? So why did I ask you that? I ask you that because I believe somewhere in time, somewhere in history, we got everything wrong. We went from being a society that the sole goal was to work hard for the pursuit of happiness. And food was the fuel source to enable you to do that. And somewhere in history, everything flipped. And we went from a society that was working hard to pursue happiness to a society who found their happiness in food. And so the problem is, and this is kind of where transference comes into play here, when you start to change your life and create a new way, I already told you there are going to be transitional moments that you will have to decide. If I want to continue this journey, I have to walk away from some things. And you will trade them out. You will say, okay, instead of this, I'll have that. And instead of this, I'll have that. And you'll always be limited to what you think you can't live without in those moments. And if you aren't willing to make those changes, it just never changes. You will stay right where you are and not progress any further, and you'll be going crazy and trying to figure out why can't you go any further. And essentially, you are your own anchor in that point. You are holding yourself back because you're unwilling to even entertain the idea that sacrifice is involved in this journey. As I said before on this podcast, this journey is a journey of sacrifice. And in the process of you attempting to become healthy, what's really happening is you're becoming the best version of you. As you become the best version of yourself, you encounter trials. Every time you win in a trial, you come out the other end stronger than where you started. Because the only way to the end is through the trial. Can't go around it, can't go over it, you're going through it. And if you just decide that you're not going to go through it, you'll stay right where you are and go around in circles over and over again, thinking you're making progress. And so it's ideology like that that will always slow you down from getting to where you want to go. Because the source of your happiness is food. The source of your happiness, and the reason I asked you the question, if you could do anything and your physical attributes weren't an issue, your finances weren't an issue, and the possibility of failure was eliminated, what would you do? I asked you this because something needs to become the source of happiness. And that something cannot be another food source. It cannot be another thing you're addicted to. It has to bring you true happiness. You know what's really sad about all this? We have normalized food as the source of happiness, so much so that a doctor can tell you, well, you have diabetes. And you would more apt to seek medication just so you can continue the lifestyle you live than to do some hard things and have an entirely different life. It's as if you would scream, take everything else, just don't take my food. Don't take my cookies. Don't take my ice cream. Don't take my pasta. Take everything else. Chop my toes off. Chop part of my foot off. Chop any limb you want off. My quality of life is defined by the food I'm allowed to eat, not by what I can accomplish. That's essentially what we say. How many diabetics have I seen start to have toes amputated, partial foot amputation, fingers, whatever it is? They lose their vision. All in the name of not changing how they eat, because how they eat is the source of their happiness. And if you don't find a new source of happiness. You know what the hell? You know what happens here a lot of times because there's not a new source of happiness involved? People become sick and tired of living this life because you've given up so many things at this point. Because if you're doing what I said, if you're going through the journey of sacrifice and you're making the transitions, whatever you started with, whatever you end with is nowhere near where you started. How I began this journey and how I am right now, I'm two different men. Forget about the man I was before I started the journey. How I ate when I started this and how I eat now, you would think it's two different people. Because that's how drastically different I eat. And in order for you to become the best version of you, the same steps needed to occur. But also in the process, finding a new source of happiness needs to happen. Because if you don't find one, guess what? One will find you. And I don't care what it is, if a source of happiness finds you, it's never healthy. When I talk about transference, I talk about we go from eating like crazy to smoking like crazy, eating like crazy to drinking like crazy, eating like crazy to having a recreational drug habit, eating like crazy to shopping like crazy. The addictive behavior still continues. There's a new source of happiness. That's the kind of happiness that found you. When it's equally unhealthy, just in a different way, that's the source of happiness that found you. But I asked you to look deep within. And if your physical body wasn't a problem, your finances weren't a problem, and the possibility of failure was out the window, what would you attempt to do? What is it? What would you do? What have you always dreamed of? That's how the quality of life returns. The pursuit of true happiness. But you know what the problem is? The problem is we are so jaded. All of those things we used to dream of doing, they're so far-fetched in our minds, and we just can't possibly see the possibility that if you actually gave a little bit effort and stopped caring whether or not you failed or whatever other thing that you think is holding you back, whether it's your age or your abilities or whatever it is, as long as that those things, if you can remove all of those things and just actually attempt it, you might find that the one thing that would make you happy above everything else you ever thought still exists. And your age doesn't matter. Your physical body doesn't matter. Your finances doesn't matter. I mean, I told you many times in this podcast, my dream as a teenager, as a 20-something-year-old, was to be a sports talk radio host. And I gave that dream up out of fear. But here I am now, living some sort of version of that here on this podcast. This podcast has become a source of happiness in many ways. It also has become a source of frustration in many ways. But I power through. Every week I'm here. I didn't have everything. I don't have a soundproof booth in my house. I don't have the top of the line equipment that all of these stars have. I just have me, a microphone, and a computer. That's how I started. I'm here right now with that same equipment. And my skills have gotten better. Everything has gotten better. But without me attempting, nothing would change. So what is it that you forgot? What did you always dream of? Get those dreams back, man. What good is life if dreams are not possible? What good is life if the only source of your happiness is the food that you eat? Forget that shit. Forget it. It doesn't matter. It's just a fuel source for the body. That's all it is. It's not happiness. It's not joy. It's not comfort. It's not anything. Your dreams still exist, and it doesn't matter what you think is holding you back. Forget it all. Just think about what I asked you in this episode, and think about one thing you can do with whatever you got, with the clothes on your back. One thing you can do to get closer to that dream. That's what I want from you. Something needs to replace your old life. There has to be a new life that replaces the old life. Otherwise, you're always going to look back to what was, and you're going to say, well, is it really worth it? Of course it's worth it. You just have your eyes on the wrong thing. It's time to refocus, readjust, and figure out what was the dream that you forgot. I love each and every one of you. God bless you all.